"Move it, old man," the officer barked. "I said stop." But the blind veteran kept walking, slow, unaware. Seconds later, the taser hit. 7 minutes later, the military arrived. The morning air was crisp in the quiet town of Ridgefield, the kind of place where routine was religion. Sunlight streaked across the narrow streets, bouncing off windshield glass and diner signs, as folks started their usual Monday. But for 68-year-old James "Jimmy" Hart, every morning was a battlefield, not because of traffic, not because of taxes, but because Jimmy was blind. And the world didn't slow down for blind men. He stood at the edge of Maple and 3rd, tapping his white cane rhythmically against the sidewalk's curb. His free hand rested gently on the harness of his loyal service dog, Max, a golden retriever trained to guide Jimmy through the chaos of modern life. Max sniffed the air cautiously, sensing movement ahead. Jimmy tilted his head. "Max," he whispered, just loud enough for the dog to hear. "We clear." Max didn't move. Jimmy knew that meant no. The sound of passing cars buzzed through his ears, some slowing, most speeding past, impatient. Somewhere across the street, a car honked. Then another. Someone muttered, "Get out of the way!" Jimmy flinched, not from the noise, but from the sudden flood of shame. He didn't like being a burden. He never had. Long before the darkness took his eyes in Iraq, shrapnel from an IED that tore through his convoy, Jimmy had been the guy who helped others cross, not the one needing help. He was a squad leader, sharp, respected, and unshakable. The kind of soldier that men followed without hesitation. Now, even stepping off a curb took strategy. He gently moved his foot forward and tapped again. The cane struck the asphalt. Max let out a soft, unsure grunt. Jimmy hesitated, then made the call. "Let's go, Max," he said, and stepped off the curb. He moved slowly, one deliberate footstep at a time, his left hand guiding the cane while Max stayed close. The crosswalk had no audible signals, no helpful chirps or cues, just instincts, just faith. Halfway across, a car screeched nearby, making Jimmy stop cold. He turned his head, trying to locate the sound. Another honk, more voices. "He's gonna get hit!" "Someone get him off the road!" Max barked nervously, circling Jimmy protectively. But Jimmy didn't panic. This wasn't new. Every day brought a moment like this. A split second where it felt like the world might just swallow him whole. But he kept going. He had no idea that someone was watching him from just down the block. Officer Kincaid, 28, was fresh out of academy, still carrying that dangerous mix of adrenaline and insecurity. He'd transferred to Ridgefield a week ago from a bigger city, frustrated that small-town life meant less action. Until now. He watched Jimmy from inside his cruiser, parked near the corner gas station. At first, he thought the man was drunk. The slow steps, the waving stick, the dog barking. He narrowed his eyes. No leash. Stumbling in traffic. Obstructing the street. Kincaid muttered to himself. "Yeah, you can't do that, buddy." He got out of the car, chest puffed. Didn't bother to check the man's face. Didn't see the white cane. Didn't care about the veteran patch on the side of Jimmy's jacket. He just saw someone not complying. Kincaid called out sharply, "Hey, you! Step back! What are you doing?" Jimmy stopped mid-stride. The voice came from somewhere. Right? Left? He couldn't tell. "Sir?" Jimmy asked cautiously. "I'm just trying to get across." "I said step back!" The officer barked louder now, walking toward him. Jimmy's hand tightened on Max's harness. Max whined again. Kincaid was 10 feet away now, hand on his taser. Jimmy raised his hand slightly, palm open. "Officer, I'm blind. My dog, he's trained." But Kincaid wasn't listening. All he saw was a man in the middle of the street, not following commands. And that was enough for him. "Final warning," he shouted. Jimmy didn't move, didn't know what to do. The noise, the confusion, it was too much. Kincaid drew his taser, and with a flick of his wrist, click, zzz. The prongs hit Jimmy in the chest. His whole body jerked violently. Max let out a terrified bark as Jimmy crumpled to the pavement, his cane snapping beneath him. Gasps echoed from the sidewalk. Cars stopped. Someone screamed. Max lay next to his master, trembling. Jimmy's face twisted in pain as he tried to speak, but no words came out. The sun was still shining, but the street had gone silent. And somewhere in that silence, a phone call was made. Officer Kincaid stood over the crumpled figure of Jimmy Hart, his chest heaving from the adrenaline. The taser wires still dangled from the prongs embedded in the veteran's shirt. twitching slightly in the breeze. Max whimpered beside his fallen handler, licking Jimmy's trembling hands, refusing to leave his side. Kincaid muttered into his radio, voice flat, almost annoyed. Suspect down. Non-compliant individual, possibly under the influence. Request backup and medical. But even as he spoke, there was a tension in the air. He could feel it. People weren't clapping or cheering for law and order. They were staring. Some were shouting. "What's wrong with you? He's blind, you idiot. You just tased a disabled vet." The officer turned and scanned the small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. Half a dozen people had phones out, recording, whispering. A teenage girl stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. She'd seen the whole thing and had filmed it from start to finish. Kincaid's face tightened. His grip on the taser handle was still too firm. He holstered it, suddenly aware of how silent everything had become. Jimmy tried to speak, but his voice was a hoarse whisper, his body shaking as the electricity wore off. Why did you do that?" he mumbled. The officer knelt beside him, not out of concern, but control. "You didn't comply," he said coldly. "You ignored multiple commands in a public street. You were a danger to yourself and traffic." Jimmy coughed, struggling to breathe. I didn't hear you. I couldn't see." Max let out a low growl, something between fear and defense. Kincaid rolled his eyes. "Then maybe you shouldn't be walking around alone." That was the line that pushed the crowd over the edge. An older woman stepped forward. "His name is Jimmy Hart. He served 2 tours in Iraq. He lost his vision protecting this country." Kincaid blinked. "Ma'am, I'm conducting an investigation. Please step back." But no one moved. The crowd was growing, not dispersing. People were murmuring his name now. Jimmy Hart, war hero, blinded in combat. A middle-aged man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap appeared behind the group. His voice was firm. "I know Jimmy. We served together. You just tased a decorated hero, son." Kincaid swallowed hard. This wasn't going how he expected. He looked down again at the man he'd just tased. For the first time, he noticed the frayed military patch stitched onto Jimmy's jacket. 3rd Infantry Division, the same unit known for some of the most brutal battles in Iraq. Underneath it, a silver pin that glinted just enough to reveal Bronze Star. The officer stood up quickly, scanning the horizon for backup. Where were they? He didn't know that someone in the crowd had already made another call, not to 911, but to a different number entirely. 2 blocks away, just outside the Ridgefield VFW Hall, Colonel Marcus Bell was sitting in a truck with 4 other men in uniform, eating lunch after a National Guard drill. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. "Bell," a voice came through, panicked but clear. "It's Jimmy. He's down. Some rookie cop just tased him in the street." Bell froze. "Where?" "Maple and 3rd. The colonel didn't hesitate. He dropped his sandwich, hit the ignition, and turned to the others. "Mount up. We've got a situation." Back at the scene, Kincaid paced nervously. Jimmy was still lying on the ground, cradled now by a bystander who had gently removed the taser prongs. Max hadn't left his side. "Where's the ambulance?" someone shouted. "I already called it," another replied. Kincaid finally spoke into his shoulder mic again. "Dispatch, status on medical response?" The reply came back. "Unit is en route. ETA 10 minutes. PD backup delayed." Kincaid cursed under his breath. A rumble echoed faintly in the distance. At first it sounded like thunder, then louder, rhythmic, guttural. Engines. People turned their heads. From the far end of Maple Street, 4 matte green military Humvees emerged one after another, moving with purpose, ignoring stop signs and traffic lights. They came fast, with force. They didn't stop at the crosswalk. They blocked off the entire road in front and behind the scene, cutting off traffic, forcing everyone to halt. The first truck stopped just feet from where Jimmy lay. Colonel Bell stepped out, face grim, jaw tight. He wore his Army combat uniform, cap squared, ribbons aligned. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the cameras. He walked straight to Jimmy, knelt beside him, and said softly, "I'm here, brother. You're safe now." Jimmy reached for the voice and gripped Bell's hand. Max wagged his tail and licked Bell's arm. Bell then stood and turned toward Kincaid. The crowd went silent. "You want to explain to me," Bell asked, voice controlled but steely, Why my soldier, who served this country blind, is lying in the street electrocuted? Kincaid started to stammer. Sir, he wasn't obeying commands. He's blind, Bell cut in. He lost his vision into Crete, dragging 3 men out of a burning Humvee under machine gun fire, and today he was walking to a VA appointment. Kincaid's face drained of color. Bell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "You didn't just tase a man, you tased a symbol." The weight of those words settled like concrete, and in that moment Kincaid realized this was more than a mistake. This was national. No one spoke. Not the bystanders, not the officer, not even the dogs barking in the distance. The moment Colonel Bell uttered those words, "You didn't just tase a man, you tased a symbol," the entire street seemed to freeze in time. Even the wind held its breath. Officer Kincaid stood stiff, lips parted, unsure if he should defend himself or disappear. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like a man who just realized the entire game was being played on a different field, and he was already losing. Bell didn't step closer. He didn't need to. His uniform, his bearing, and the 3 other National Guard officers standing beside him said everything. Then came the sound no rookie cop wants to hear behind him. Footsteps, authority, purpose. The Ridgefield police chief, Harold Monroe, had arrived. He was a stout man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, slow to anger, but furious when he got there. And this had crossed the line. He stepped past the military men without hesitation, crouched beside Jimmy, and gently laid a hand on his shoulder. "Jimmy," he said, "it's Harold. You all right, brother?" Jimmy, still rattled but conscious, gave a slight nod. His breathing was uneven. Max curled into him protectively. Monroe rose to his feet and turned toward Kincaid. His face wasn't red with rage. It was cold, disappointed, the kind of look that burned deeper than shouting ever could. "You tased Jimmy Hart?" Monroe asked, voice low. Kincaid, clearly sweating now, tried to stand straighter. He didn't follow commands. He was in the street, obstructing, Monroe interrupted. "He's blind, Kincaid. He's blind. And you didn't even take a second to look at the man's face before you dropped him with a taser in the middle of the road." Kincaid's mouth moved, searching for some excuse. "He didn't say anything at first. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't need to know his name," Monroe snapped. "You just had to look. You just had to listen." Monroe stepped back and pointed at the crowd. "They saw it. They heard him. A kid over there was filming. Half this town already knows." The teenage girl holding her phone swallowed hard. "I sent the video to my brother. He's a reporter." Monroe didn't flinch. "Then I guess the rest of the country's about to know too." There was a pause. Then, one by one, the crowd began to move again, slowly. A woman knelt to offer Jimmy a bottle of water. An older man laid his jacket under his head. Max sniffed their hands before allowing them near. Jimmy finally spoke, hoarse and quiet. "I just wanted to get to the VA." Colonel Bell looked down at him. "You'll get there, but not walking." He turned toward his men. "Lift him!" 2 soldiers stepped forward with practiced care and gently helped Jimmy to his feet. Max stayed close, tail low but wagging, sensing his handler was safe now. Bell nodded toward one of the military Humvees. "Take him in ours. Let the VA know he's coming in style." Cheers didn't erupt. Applause didn't echo. The silence was too sacred, but eyes watered and jaws clenched. As the soldiers escorted Jimmy into the vehicle, the convoy stayed in formation, blocking off both ends of the road, their presence a message louder than sirens. Kincaid stood awkwardly near the curb, unsure if he should even move. He looked to Monroe for a signal, a lifeline. He got none. Monroe finally spoke. "Turn in your weapon and badge. Now." Kincaid's eyes widened. "Wait, Chief, I didn't—" "Now." Reluctantly, shakily, Kincaid unclipped his service weapon, ejected the magazine, and handed it over. Then the badge. The crowd watched, stone-faced. A few captured the moment on their phones, the same way people capture lightning. A symbol of power stripped away. When Kincaid finally walked off, escorted by another officer, someone from the crowd whispered, "He should have looked before he pulled that trigger." A murmur of agreement passed through the group like a ripple in a still pond. The street remained blocked for another 20 minutes. Not because of security, but because the convoy refused to move until they were sure Jimmy was safe, seated, and en route to care. Inside the Humvee, Jimmy sat quietly, one hand resting on Max's head. Bell sat across from him, arms folded. "I thought I was going to die in that street," Jimmy muttered. Bell leaned forward, voice steady. Not on my watch. Jimmy gave a tired smile. Guess I picked the right town to fall in. Bell returned the smile. You picked the wrong cop, but the right brothers. And with that, the convoy rolled forward, slow, steady, undeniable. Behind them, the town stood changed, and ahead of them, justice was already catching up. By the time Jimmy Hart reached the VA clinic, the video had already gone viral. Footage of a blind veteran being tased by a patrol officer in broad daylight while simply trying to cross a street spread like wildfire across social media. Millions watched in stunned silence as Jimmy's body seized from the electric jolt, his white cane flying from his hand, Max barking desperately as the man who wore the uniform of a nation collapsed in pain. And then came the images of the military convoy rolling in like silent judgment, protecting one of their own. Standing tall where the system had failed, the headlines were immediate and unforgiving. Decorated blind vet tased by cop, rescued by military convoy. Hero humiliated, National Guard steps in where police did not. Justice wears camouflage. Officers who serve know who they protect. By evening, news vans circled the Ridgefield Police Department like sharks. Reporters swarmed the station. Microphones were thrust toward any official who dared step outside. Chief Monroe, true to his word, did not hide. At the podium, he looked straight into the cameras. His voice was firm, controlled. I have reviewed the footage, spoken with multiple eyewitnesses, and, most importantly, visited Mr. Hart at the VA clinic myself. What occurred today was unacceptable, inexcusable, and a betrayal of our oath to protect and serve. He paused. Officer Kincaid has been suspended pending internal investigation, but I won't wait for paperwork to tell the truth. A man who cannot recognize a blind veteran in need is not fit to wear the badge of this department. Applause echoed from the watching crowd. Reporters shouted questions. Was it a racial incident? Will there be criminal charges? Has the mayor responded? But Monroe raised his hand. This isn't about politics. This is about humanity. Meanwhile, in Jimmy's hospital room, the old veteran sat upright in his bed, a light bandage on his temple. Max lay at his feet, finally calm. His fingers absent-mindedly stroked the dog's ears as the news played quietly on the wall-mounted TV. He was no longer anonymous. His service record, once quietly filed away, was now plastered across every major network. Bronze Star recipient, IED survivor, 3rd Infantry Division, blinded into Crete, 2-time Purple Heart. I didn't ask for this, Jimmy murmured. Colonel Bell, seated beside him, gave a soft chuckle. No one asks to become a symbol. It just happens when the right person stands in the wrong place and refuses to fall alone. Jimmy sighed. I just wanted to get my prescriptions. Bell leaned forward. You gave this country more than most ever will. If it takes a viral video and a convoy of brothers to remind America who it's supposed to fight for, so be it. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs arrived in Ridgefield, without fanfare, without press. She walked straight into the VA clinic, found Jimmy in the rehab wing, and sat beside him. I saw the video, she said, and I saw the convoy. Jimmy didn't respond at first. Then, you know what hurt the most? She turned. That I wasn't surprised, Jimmy said quietly. That somewhere deep down, I expected it. That being blind, old, and forgotten is just how it works now. The secretary reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a newly commissioned Civil Valor Medal, a rarely awarded honor reserved for those whose courage sparked national change outside of combat. We don't forget our own, she said softly. Jimmy blinked behind his dark glasses. It sure felt like it. Not anymore. The following weekend, Ridgefield hosted its largest veterans parade in history. Jimmy didn't walk this time. He rode in the front vehicle, Max proudly seated beside him, wearing a vest adorned with a new patch. Service dog, U.S. Army return. Behind them, the same 4 Humvees that had blocked off the road. Crowds lined the streets, holding signs. We see you, Jimmy. Heroes deserve better. Blind, not invisible. And then came a sound unlike any other, deep, rich, and rumbling like distant thunder. Over a dozen motorcycles, all ridden by veterans from across the country, rolled into town. They'd seen the video, they'd seen the convoy, And they'd come to stand with Jimmy. What started as a mistake had become a movement. The sound of justice wasn't in the sirens. It was in the boots hitting pavement, in engines that never stalled, in voices that said, "Never again." As the convoy rolled past the exact intersection where Jimmy had been tased, the crowd fell silent. Jimmy removed his cap, placed it over his heart, and raised his chin to the sun. He could not see the crowd, but the crowd saw him. In the weeks that followed, Jimmy Hart's name became more than just a trending hashtag. It became a rallying cry. Veterans groups from across the nation began organizing under a new banner, Eyes Forward. Their message was simple: no soldier should ever be forgotten, overlooked, or humiliated on the streets they fought to defend. Jimmy's story was no longer just his. It was theirs, too. TV networks called daily. Book publishers sent proposals. Advocacy organizations offered speaking tours. But Jimmy declined them all. He didn't want fame. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to be seen. And now, he was. Back in Ridgefield, change was already taking root. Chief Monroe instituted mandatory empathy and disability training for all officers. A new department-wide directive was signed. No citizen left unseen. It became policy that all officers carry basic training cards for handling citizens with disabilities, especially veterans. The town council renamed the very crosswalk where Jimmy had fallen. A small bronze plaque was embedded into the sidewalk. It read, "In honor of James Jimmy Hart, U.S. Army. Blinded in war, but never in spirit. May we all look before we judge." Every morning, school buses passed that sign. Every afternoon, veterans nodded in quiet approval. Every night, Max walked Jimmy safely across that same road, this time with drivers slowing down and offering waves. Then came the letter, stamped with the presidential seal, delivered by hand. Jimmy opened it with shaky fingers, his voice cracking as he read aloud. "Mr. Hart, your strength in the face of injustice reminded an entire nation what honor truly looks like. I am deeply sorry for the pain you endured, but even more grateful for the light you've shined. You remind us that our heroes do not fade. They guide. I look forward to meeting you in person." The President of the United States. Jimmy chuckled softly, tears caught in his beard. "Didn't think I'd ever get mail from the White House?" Max wagged his tail as if understanding. A month later, Jimmy stood at the National Mall in D.C., cane in one hand, Max on the other side, with thousands gathered for the Veterans Unity Summit. Colonel Bell stood behind him, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs beside him. And, just as promised, the president walked onto the stage and shook Jimmy's hand before placing a medallion over his neck. The crowd stood in silence, then thunderous applause, not just for Jimmy, but for every forgotten hero he represented, for every blind vet crossing a street with no one watching, for every hand that trembled trying to sign a check, for every heart that once wore the uniform, and now just hopes to be seen. As Jimmy left the stage, a young man in uniform stepped forward, barely 20, nervous, saluting. Jimmy didn't see it, but he felt it. "You remind me who I'm fighting for, sir," the soldier said. Jimmy reached out, found his shoulder, and gave it a firm squeeze. "No, son. You remind me that maybe we're finally worth fighting for again." Respect wasn't just reclaimed, it was returned. And this time, the whole world was watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to Soulful Storytime for more real, emotional narratives where justice speaks loud and the forgotten are finally seen. In a world where headlines move fast and heroes are too often forgotten, one blind veteran reminded us all that respect isn't given by rank. It's earned by character. Jimmy Hart didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He simply stood, fell, and stood again. With quiet dignity. And the nation stood with him. From the street where he was tased, to the Capitol where he was honored. Jimmy's story is more than a viral clip. It's a reminder that those who've carried this country on their backs deserve more than silence when they stumble. They deserve a convoy. They deserve a voice. And above all, they deserve our unwavering respect. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it rolls in silent and strong, like brothers who never left the battlefield behind. If this story moved you, subscribe to Soulful Storytime for more real, emotional narratives where justice speaks loud and the forgotten are finally seen.